Hey everyone, welcome to another interesting conversation on G News. Today we're very lucky to be joined by Barbara Edmonds, who, as you all know, is Labour's finance spokesperson. Hey Barbara, welcome back to G News.
Yeah, Tyler for Love, nice to be back. And well done on all your mahi as well, dissecting things, particularly during scrutiny week.
Thank you very much. Yeah, it's a constant thing, isn't it? It's for all of us. Now, you've said that the biggest lesson from the previous Labour government was that if you put people first, the economy is stronger every single time. Can you talk to us a bit more about putting the people first and how it makes the economy stronger?
Yeah, absolutely. You have to put people first. Behind every number in a statistic, there's a person, there's a family that they support, a community that they're part of. So every time when I'm thinking about policy, as we develop policy, I'm looking through how does this impact on the worker? How does this impact on the everyday mum and dad who are just trying to live? So that's why Labour's focused is on people's jobs, on their health, on ensuring they have a home, and real action on the cost of living. I cannot stress how much we are hearing it from everyday New Zealanders that the cost of living is their number one priority. So people would have also seen that we've released a few policies over the last couple of weeks, such as our fares cap on public transport, $20 if you're in Auckland, Wellington, Christchurch, and $10 everywhere else. You would have just hot off the press today. We released our free prescriptions. I mean, we're taking it back. Those little bits and pieces count towards, making sure you have more money in your pocket. And then one of my favourites that we've just had is the free maternity screening, which a lot of people actually thought were free. And yes, they used to be free a while ago, but actually some parts of the country you still have to pay for them, and up to $90 for a scan. So our view is that money should never be a barrier to ensuring the well-being of the mother or the child. And obviously 3 free doctor's visits. So this is all about us putting people first, focusing on their health, focusing on real action on the cost of living. But what you see from the government, though, is still a prioritisation towards tax breaks for property speculators, the tobacco companies, the 50% discount they get on their heated tobacco products. They're still there. And this year's budget was their last budget. And they really had a chance to show that they were thinking about all New Zealanders, but there was nothing in there.
Yeah, there wasn't. It was a pretty dry affair. And we've seen nearly every single macroeconomic measure get worse since National have taken power. And we've seen them put the debt curve before the people that are out there working hard every day. So what do you think of Willis's track record so far, and how she's actually casting that anything you do to help is irresponsible somehow?
Oh, the irony, right? Just, it's terrible. Like, there's going to be higher unemployment for longer. It's quite clear that it's going to be higher costs on people. There's still debt under National. They're just taking on debt to give it to landlords and tobacco company tax breaks. Labour takes debt seriously too. But this sort of single-minded obsession with debt doesn't help Kiwis put food on the table, pay the rent, see a doctor when they need one. So we can do both, reduce debt over time while investing in the things that matter to Kiwis. And again, it's your job, it's your healthcare, it's your home, and again, the number one issue that Kiwis are saying to us, it's the cost of living.
Yeah. Yesterday, I was watching you in the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee during Scrutiny Week, and I believe you discovered a real fiscal risk where Treasury is currently refusing to disclose what it may have provision for pay equity in coming years, despite there being no new claims for pay equity made at the moment. And they said that there's no money ring-fenced in the future allowances for the funded sector, and that pay equity would be treated on a case-by-case basis. Can you explain to us what this means and how it plays into the demands that Nicola Willis is making, that you show her the money right now, how you're going to pay for her pay equity theft from hundreds of thousands of women in New Zealand?
Well, she needs to show the money. She said she's committed to pay equity, but what you saw yesterday from Treasury was a very frankness from them, and that's good that they're free and frank, which is basically there's no contingency, there's no money that's been set aside for the sectors that are funded by government. So it's hugely irresponsible. It is fiscally irresponsible, given that there is legislation there saying that if it meets certain criteria, they are entitled to a pay equity, settlement. But it's quite clear they haven't actually set that aside for the funded sector, and then they say for the public sector, it's in there within their forecast. So it's, from my perspective, it's very fiscally irresponsible by Nicola Willis, and Labour is committed to reinstating pay equity legislation and paying women what they deserve. It's going to be a tough one because National took money that was meant for nurses, teachers and midwives, and they handed it to property speculators and tobacco companies. They basically have blown the budget on the things that matter to them, but not necessarily the things that matter to everyday New Zealanders. And that will take time to fix, but that's something I'm committed to fixing.
Thanks. Yesterday, you also asked Nicola Willis when she had last visited a food bank or a state house and sat down with a family and talked about their issues that they're experiencing. And then she called that a stunt without really answering you. What have you seen and heard from people out there about those issues that they're facing?
So to Nicola Willis calling it a stunt, clearly shows just how out of touch that she is. Those were genuine questions, just like every question that I ask of the Minister of Finance. And why I'd asked about the food bank is because earlier in that session with the minister, I got cut off by the chair because I wanted to because she was talking about the food network. So I was like, well, when was the last time you visited a food bank? And then my question around state housing, given their changes to social housing, where state housing tenants are going to see a rent increase of $31 on average. These are actual people. Again, going back to that very first point I made, these are people, these are working families, these are families who cannot make ends meet. They are going to a food bank, not because they want to, but because they have to. And so my questions to Nicola Willis were, how in touch are you with these people? Are you talking to them? Because you say a lot that people are doing it tough, but do you actually know how they're feeling? Because you can say those words, but if you're not meeting face to face with them, then they just are a number, and that's the way that this government is treating people. So people are hurting. Families are having to make tough choices between food and filling up at the petrol station. And Nicola Willis is so out of touch that she can't even fix that.
It is like treating people like a number. Some of these numbers are pretty shocking. There's 47,000 more children who are living in poverty now since 2022. And Jack Tame estimated that this would be costing New Zealand, just in purely economic terms, something like $15 billion a year, using some OECD averages for countries that were a bit like us. And then Nicola Willis didn't seem to register that cost, but instead she argued that the most sustainable way to lift children out of poverty is to support parents into stable work and better wages rather than address the fact they've got an empty belly right now. Is this wait until the economy comes right and everyone gets a job narrative really just a big cop-out? And what makes Labour's approach to this rising child poverty we're seeing completely different?
So poverty is a policy choice. So Willis said people who lost their jobs shouldn't take it personally. You've heard the Prime Minister say people on benefits are bottom feeders. They also said they were promising growth, right? So growth equates to sort of higher wages and, the production of within the economy, more goods and services, so higher wages, better living standards. But where has the growth been for the last 2.5 years? they've promised to make things better, but they've actually made it worse. I mean, I just can't. New Zealand can't. We can't afford another 3 years of a national government who effectively looks through numbers, doesn't see the people behind their choices, and really just sort of shrugs their shoulders. And it's like, well, go get a job. But it's like, where are the jobs?
No, exactly. New Zealand now has eight more billionaires than it did in the previous year, and that's bringing our total to 26 billionaires. The collective wealth of the country's wealthiest individuals grew by an annual rate of 26.35%, rising to about $129 billion overall compared to 102 billion or so a year ago. So most people that I know haven't not had an increase of 26% in their wealth by contrast, and they possibly actually had a real terms pay cut in their income and their wealth. Can you comment on that widening gap that we're seeing and what needs to be done to close this gap?
Yeah, meanwhile, according to real GDP per person, New Zealanders are about $1,500 poorer since they were in March 2023. That's according to today's stats. Again, we shouldn't be measuring our country's success based on the numbers of billionaires we have, but on whether those doing the toughest are actually getting better, are seeing improvements in their life. You know, this is what a government's for. It's about lifting all boats, not just the ones at the very top.
Yeah, it really is. Now, capital gains tax to fund free doctors' visits and free scans for mothers seems to me like a really good use of unproductive money. And you've been pretty conservative about setting your forecasts around the house price growth that we might expect. I think you said it was 3%, something like that, which, you know, takes into account that it's going to be pretty flat probably for the next few years. And we seem to have gotten this estimate about right, it would seem. Can you comment for these sorts of reasons, why it's important that we have an independent policy costing agency before this election, and what Nicola Willis's response to that idea has been?
Yeah, well, I actually have a members bill on this now back in the tin. And I'd actually had that members bill in just over a year ago, but then earlier this year I actually transferred it to Penny Henare, and we just haven't put it back in since Penny Henare has resigned from Parliament. So what I'm proposing is a parliamentary budgetary officer. And why the public deserves to know whether a policy stacks up. So my members bill would give voters confidence that parties across the political spectrum are being honest and responsible with their numbers. So under my proposal, that a parliamentary budget officer would publish full costings of major parties' election manifestos. It includes impacts on inflation, GDP, unemployment, child poverty and emissions. And any party in Parliament, or those that receive over 3% of the vote at the last election, could request policy costings. The officer would also be tasked with analysing government's budgets and fiscal updates. It's a common sense bill. It's a common sense type of office. It's a win for voters, transparency, and more honest politics, so we can stop bickering about the costings, the assumptions, the modelling, and we can have a proper contest of ideas. This is very much similar to the Australian Parliamentary Budget Officer, where senators can submit policies to the Parliamentary Budget Office to help with to review the costings of it. So to ensure that things are actually transparent and that the numbers isn't where the debate is. The debate is around the policy.
Yeah. Well, speaking of policy, there was a whole bunch of spin around the forecasts, I think, when it came out of the budget, and then, it was asked, where are your policies? Anyway, that forecasting that they did, they copped a lot of flack for that and a lot of shade, because the main idea is that things will come right in a couple of years down the track, and we'll have this Obergalex surplus, and we'll have debt on the way down. And I think Treasury are now saying, oh, well, the price of oil is a little bit lower now today than it was when we made our forecasts back in April. But all bets are still really off because, with Trump, who's to say what could actually happen around the corner? And this memorandum of agreement, I think it's got a 60-day clause in there for where Iran says it's not going to charge something. So what happens after 60 days, I don't know. But should Treasury, when it comes to forecasting and policy making, be providing more regular updated forecasts? And should Nicola Willis, if she does have information, be sharing that more generously with you and the public so that we can get a better idea of things going into elections?
Oh, I've said it ever since the war or the conflict sort of escalated. The most certain thing at the moment is uncertainty. So it's a really hard time for forecasters. And at the start of the session yesterday with the Minister of Treasury, I did acknowledge Treasury for the tough job that they had. And I did ask some questions around, is there anything we could do as Parliament to support you, particularly during that budget period, because there's a moratorium, basically where they start to forecast, and it was just after Anzac Day or just before Anzac Day for them. So there is that lag, between Anzac Day and budget day. But ultimately, even if you're doing the forecast, because it's a difficult job to do in the best of times anyway, even more so with uncertain times. But I always go back to the responsibility of the minister. And if Nicola Willis was more in touch with the general public and not just speaking to the people that she wants to speak to, she should probably be hearing the message very strongly from New Zealanders saying they're hurting. And she'd actually have a better idea of how badly people need help, which again goes to my question to the minister yesterday. When was the last time you went to a food bank? When was the last time you went to a steakhouse and you spoke to those tenants? And so as an MP, it is one of my greatest privileges to represent an area. And for me, it's about making sure I stay in touch, particularly with our social service providers, because they give you the on the ground, the in the trenches observations of what they're seeing. And through my discussions with them quite recently, the thing that they're saying is the demand is significant, and the people that are coming through are not the ordinary people that they would normally see. A lot of them are two-income working families, and they just cannot make ends meet. So by staying in touch with people, you are able to get a much better feel for whether, how the economy is kind of going. But that comes down to just staying in touch. And unfortunately, we've seen it, with this government, just how badly out of touch they are.
Yesterday, we found out that the pre-election fiscal update will be made available on Thursday, the 24th of September, 2026. And I guess you're going to really need to see that information before you can possibly release your fiscal plan. Isn't that pretty much normal for all political parties who are being serious about election, policy costs at the end of the day? So, if that's the case, why all the pressure to release policies before the budget and even now?
Well, Nicola Willis's Sunday press conference where she brought people in from the media just so she can attack the Labour Party and to say, release your fiscal plan and release your modelling. And it's like, well, actually, you release your fiscal plan first. And hang on, where's your policies? But anyway, we'll be definitely releasing our fiscal plan ahead of the election. We're going through that process now, particularly as budget. We've just had budget 2 weeks ago. But, New Zealand can be rest assured, everything we announce will be fully costed. That's my jam. That's my bread and butter and jam. That's how we roll, and the way that I've worked, having had a policy background as well. So everything we announce will be fully costed. And again, it goes back to that earlier point. Having a parliamentary budget officer means that you can actually contest the policies, the benefits, the cons of it, as opposed to sort of the old drumbeat that the National Party always drum around costings, etc.
Yeah, and David Seymour, he doesn't want a bar of it. running a
All
mile.
leaders apparently, so that's
Yeah.
two of them. And we said at the time, well, if the Minister of Finance wants to come and talk to, I'm happy to have a chat with her. I had the bill in the biscuit tin at that time, and it's like, come and have a chat. We'll be willing to give you the numbers if it's the best thing for New Zealand and for transparency. But didn't hear anything.
Wow. Finally, could you sum up the economic situation we're finding ourselves in today? We've got some GDP figures that have come out, and the cost of living situation that are facing working people in particular. And if there's any other messages you'd like to convey to get across to our audience, go for it.
I know for a lot of New Zealanders that the cost of living is the number one issue that matters to them. And if it's not to them, it's to their family or the community in which they live in. Christopher Luxon and Nicola Willis did promise to make things better. But do you feel better off than you did 2.5 years ago? And when I've asked that question in community meetings, it's always a resounding no. The National Party have made things worse. Unemployment is high, the cost of living is high, and unfortunately, what we've seen from this government, they are so out of touch, they have no idea how to fix it. So Labour, we do have a plan. We've made several announcements to help families with the cost of living, like free doctor's visits, free prescriptions, for our upcoming parents, free maternity scans. We've got a lot more that we'll announce in due course, but ultimately, hang in there, team. We can do this together, and we're going to, come November 8th, we want to ensure that we have an economy that's working for everyone.
Barbara Edmonds, thank you so much for your time today. And we all appreciate your big heart and everything you have to say to us all. And all the best with the election campaign.
Thank you very much.
Welcome to G News, the good news.